Hello, this is Tim Congdon. I'm chairman of the Institute of International Monetary Research at the University of Buckingham. This is the latest in the monthly discussions of monetary trends around the world. Although in the last year or so, the focus has been very much on the United States, and that remains so today. The presentation is being given at the end of July 2021. And a key issue in the public debate is about inflation. At the moment, there is a rise in American inflation. The latest increase in the consumer price index in last year is 5.4%. And the question is this upward drift in inflation, is it transitory or will it be more permanent? In these presentations, I've been taking a strong view since spring 2020 that more inflation was to be expected. And this is the slide, the last slide in the last of these videos. And you can see the very strong conclusion drawn at the end that CPI inflation will be between 5 and 10% between now and the end of next year, 2022. Whether you call this transitory or not, I think is a matter of taste. But now, you might ask a bit more about what's going on here. And obviously the background has been this extraordinary surge in the quantity of money. In the 2 years to May 2021, the quantity of money on the broadly defined M3 definition has gone up by 35%. This is higher, as you can see, than in any other 2-year period going back, to 1960, and in practice to any 2-year period since the Second World War. The quantity theory of money is the most successful single variable explanation of the movements in national income. Real money to explain real national income, and nominal money to explain nominal national income. Now, real output growth depends ultimately on the supply side characteristics of the economy. So when we get rapid money growth, the result, fast growth of nominal GDP, cannot mean higher extra output except for temporarily, and that then means there's going to be inflation. And that's been the background to the forecasts of inflation that I've been giving for quite a long time now, 15 months or so, 15 months, 18 months. So the quantity theory of money, in a sense, is being validated by recent events. I have to tell you that the quantity theory of money is in effect a victim of cancel culture. American academic economists and indeed top American policymakers simply don't want to hear this phrase. They don't want to be reminded of the most traditional and the most familiar, and I have to say again, the most successful theory of the explanation of movements in national income. There are no references to the quantity of money in the minutes of the Federal Open Market Committee in the last 15 months, this period of pandemic and turmoil in our societies and in economic policy. And there are no references either in the various pronouncements being made by the panjandrums of the American policy debate, figures such as Paul Krugman, Larry Summers, Joe Stiglitz, and so on. Just no reference to the quantity of money at all. Now, what I want to do, just by way of background, is to talk about why it is that I'm saying that inflation will be between 5 and 10% between now and the end of next year. Now, I'm not going to talk very much in the rest of this presentation about money. I'm going to just use other kinds of macroeconomics. And to talk about the rest of this year, I'm basically just going to rely upon survey evidence and rather mechanical extrapolations. Let's look first of all at this picture it comes from the Purchasing Managers Index prepared by the Institute of Supply Management. This is a regular monthly survey of what's happening on the ground with purchasing managers in manufacturing in this case. It's reporting the balance of correspondents who are expecting higher prices, and you can see, this goes back about a year or so, it's rising. That's manufacturing. It's the same exercise, same picture for services. And you can see it too is rising. Service is a bit less than manufacturing. By the way, the manufacturing value at the end is the highest since 1979. I put it to you that on the basis of these two pictures, that we should expect the monthly increase in the American measures of consumer inflation to be higher in the second half of 2021 than they were in the first half of 2021. It's a reasonable proposition. Let's now look at mechanical extrapolations using two measures of consumer inflation. The first is the Consumer Price Index as such. This is a standard measure going back a long way. I'm not going to go into its system of preparation. It's somewhat different from the so-called deflator for personal consumption expenditures, which is the measure preferred by the Federal Reserve. The PCE deflator doesn't include some erratic items and generally rises somewhat less than the Consumer Price Index, about 0.5% a year. Let's then look, I've got prepared a couple of ready reckoners for these two measures of consumer inflation going out to the end of this year. Now what I've done is the average monthly increase in the CPI in the first 6 months of the year was 0.7%. I've argued that possibly, or reasonably, we should be expecting a higher monthly increase in the balance of the year. But instead, I'm going to assume that in this exercise, that the average monthly increase is lower. I've done that because I want to get over to you how totally compelling the evidence is that we're going to get higher annual numbers on the inflation rate. Okay. Let's look, for example, at the column here where we assume that the increase per month from now on is 0.5%. It's lower than the first half of the year. You can see that in December 21, we reach a figure of 7.5%, January next year 7.6%, etc. In other words, the evidence suggests inflation is still going up on a monthly basis. I'm assuming some slowdown. There's a justification for that. Quite a bit of what's happened so far in 2021 is in fact things like oil prices, which won't recur, not on the same scale. So use 0.5%, that's what you get, 7.5, 7.6% at the end of the year. You may prefer 0.3, but you're defying the evidence. Be clear about that. Even with 0.3%, you get up to 6.2% in December. Let's then look at the PCE deflator, the measure of inflation preferred by the Federal Reserve. I've used a lower monthly figure because generally this index doesn't rise as much as the CPI. You can see that with a 0.4% a month from here, we get up towards increases of 5.5% or so by the end of the year. And with 0.6%, which actually arguably is defensible, we get up to numbers like 7% at the end, 6-7% by the end of the year. It's very difficult to see how we cannot have, between now and the end of 2021, figures between 5 and 10%. Very difficult. What then about 2022? Now here I'm going to be not appealing to money data at all. I'm going to be using ideas which are standard macroeconomics, standard Keynesian macroeconomics, and indeed using the new Keynesian proposition that the increase in inflation depends upon the level of the output gap, the level of output relative to trend. First of all, the increase in aggregate demand is equal to the increase in output, ex post, after the event. That's very important to understand how output is changing relative to trend. Okay. If we have rapid growth, then the level of output goes further above trend, and on new Keynesian reasoning, inflation rises. Okay. And then the increase in aggregate demand depends on two things. It depends on the behavior of final sales. That's final expenditure by consumers, companies, and so on. Then also there's production to change the level of inventory, change the level of stocks of raw materials, output, work in progress, and so on. Now sometimes that second bit can be very important, and it will be very important in the next year, as I'm about to explain. I'm not going to talk very much about behavior of final sales, but I would point out that at the moment US households feel very wealthy. This isn't the annual change in house prices here. This is what I've done is the 3-monthly annualized change. Notice that blip at the end, all right? That's way, way above. Let's just look at these. The annualized rate of increase in the last few months has been 15-20%. In fact, the annual increase in house prices is higher at the moment than it was in 2005-06 at the peak of the last housing boom. That, I suggest, means that there'll be a tendency to spend above normal, which is confirmed by business surveys, so that the growth of retail of final sales in the next few quarters will be at an above trend, in fact rather rapid rate probably. Let's then look at the inventory cycle. This is a chart of the inventory sales ratio for business as a whole. Roughly speaking, normally American companies keep inventories about 1.5 times their production in a month. And you can see at the moment that the ratio is very low. It's very strong, very high last spring when people couldn't spend, and it's collapsed. And this then shows you the picture of where that collapse in inventories has occurred. It's occurred particularly at the retail level. So this will then go through the supply chain, go through from retailers to wholesalers to manufacturers. On this basis, there's a period of inventory build-up that has to occur in coming quarters. Now, sorry to be a little bit professorial, a little bit didactic about all this, but the level of aggregate demand is equal to consumption, investment, and so on, plus the level of inventory building. The change in demand, which is what we're trying to get at here, is equal to the change in consumption, investing, and so on, and the change in the level of inventory building. This second number can be very volatile. Let's look what happened with the Great Recession. Great Recession, you had a collapse in change in inventories went very negative in 2008, 2009. Excuse me. And then it went very positive in 2010 and 2011. And it was that swing in the inventory cycle that stopped the Great Recession. Final sales in America in 2010, 2011 were flat. They didn't recover. The Great Recession stopped because of a change in the inventory cycle. Now you can see that what's happened in the last, 18 months or so, 15, 18 months, is another period of the change in inventories, change in inventory building has actually gone heavily negative. We've got prospect of strong final sales when inventory sales ratios are very low. There's going to be a very positive change in inventories between now and the middle of next year. It could easily be of the order of $1 trillion. That is something like that itself is 4% or so of demand. Call it 3-4% of demand. That is on top of buoyant retail sales when it's talking about, I don't know the exact figure, 7-10%, something in that 7-10% order for real growth between now and the end of, the middle, say, of next year. Obviously, all these trends are unsustainable, but we're talking about this as the prospect in the next few quarters. So in early 2022, output will be further above trend than it is now. The level of output further above trend than it is now. The output gap, so-called, will be even more positive. The change in inflation will be higher than it is now. It's all very straightforward logical analysis. It's not sort of, I'm not even appealing to the quantity of money to explaining what I'm just going through. What does this then mean? Well, and let's just again make this clear that the boom rolls on through now for a few more quarters through to the middle of 2022. Yeah, there's going to be rethinking and policy reappraisals and new departures. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But this is the framework in which decisions are going to be taken. Clearly, the Federal Reserve hasn't got a clue what's going on at the moment. In fact, Jay Powell has more or less conceded that in his latest congressional testimony. My conclusion is that inflation will be even higher in 2022 than it's been in 2021. It'll be accelerating, not accelerating, as we end this year and going into next year. This is the background to the conclusion I drew, the final slide of the previous video, that inflation in the USA will be between 5 and 10% until the end of next year. Is this to be regarded as transitory? I'll leave it to you to decide. Thank you.